Hi everyone, this is Dominic from Tonebase, and I'm so thrilled to have a dear friend, colleague, brother, Vijay Gupta here in the virtual studio today. So Vijay Gupta is, of course, a violinist. Anyone on Tonebase Violin can, of course, see some of his courses and lessons there, where he talks about, violin playing. Specifically, I know he has a lesson on Korngold's Much Ado About Nothing suite, which is fantastic, and I'm playing with him on that. But Vijay is not just a violinist. He's a speaker, he's a writer, he's the founder of Street Symphony here in Los Angeles, which serves the homeless and incarcerated communities in the area. He's a speaker at many different types of events, whether it's convocations, whether it's keynote speaking, and more. And he's also very excitedly a new author. He just wrote his new book called Restrung, which he will definitely tell you guys a little bit about in a little bit. But he just does so much. He's an entrepreneur, and also, he's a genius. He actually received the MacArthur Genius Grant, I believe, maybe about a decade ago, give or take. But regardless, he's truly an inspiring figure in the arts world at large. He's really an artist citizen, and also he's a thinker. And that's one of the main reasons that I, of course, wanted to bring him here to talk with you all today. He has a background also in neuroscience. And he applies a lot of his learnings to how he practices, how he learns, how he thinks about music, and more. So there's just a multitude of things that we'll be talking about today that are practical, that are perhaps things for you to consider incorporating into your life, and more. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat, or feel free to use the Q&A function that's right below the chat, which will spotlight your question for me. We'll be getting into the presentation very, very shortly. But again, it's just a real pleasure, and hopefully everyone can use the chat to ask whatever is on their mind. So I'm going to bring Vijay in right now. Hey, Vijay, so nice to see you.
Hey, Dominic. Hi, everybody.
So I know, Vijay, you're just about, 15 minutes away from me out in Pasadena right now. But still, it's great to have you here today. For anyone that's wondering, right behind his left ear is the new. You want to talk a little bit about that exciting thing right there?
Yeah, I would love to. Well, first of all, it's so great to be with you all. Thank you, Dominic, for a very, very lovely introduction. And hi, everyone. I'm such a huge fan of the Tonebase community, and I really feel like, the way that we get to engage as musicians with the Tonebase community is the future of music. It's the future of music education and presentation. So I'm so grateful to the Tonebase platform and to all of you for your support. And I do just want to dive in to say I've just written my first book. It's called Restrung, and it's about the ways in which music allows us to see and be in the world that shapes and transforms us. We all know that music has a massive impact in our lives, whether we are professional musicians or avocational musicians. Music speaks louder than words, and we know that in our divided, fractured world, sometimes we need to make music for ourselves just to understand who we are and what we feel and what we think about the world. But also, it gives us a way to communicate with the world around us in ways that don't need words, that don't divide us, and that bring us together naturally. So, I'll kind of dive in with a little bit of how my story relates to this live stream here. We'll be talking about the impact of music on the brain, on our brains, of course, as practitioners of music, but also on the beings and bodies and brains of the people that we get to work with. So I started playing the violin when I was 3 or 4 years old. I started playing with something called the Suzuki method. And I do want to talk a little bit about Dr. Suzuki for a second, because he did not call his method the Suzuki method. He called his method talent education. And, it's kind of amazing to think about when Dr. Suzuki started this system of working with very young children. His premise was that a child could learn an instrument like the piano or the violin or the cello the same way that a child learned language, by absorption, just by being around that language. And his book, which is beautifully titled Nurtured by Love, is the very same way that he taught his students. But it's kind of amazing to me that the generation of students that Dr. Suzuki was working with was the first generation of young people born in Japan after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after World War II. And so his idea, his philosophy was that he was going to cultivate the human spirit through music. And now, if we fast forward several decades later, almost half a century after Dr. Suzuki started his method and became famous for it, we now see that modern neuroscience has proved him absolutely correct. The child, the infant, is born with twice as many neurons as an adult needs. And if those neurons are not incorporated into circuits, those neurons naturally die off. But what we see with musicians is that because of the complicated cross hemispheric dialogue happening across the cortices of the brain, and I'll talk about exactly what that means in just a little bit, those extra neurons actually get incorporated into circuits. And so we see that people who started playing an instrument at a young age actually develop more brain density, higher brain mass. There's a part of the brain called the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. It's kind of like the information superhighway of the brain. In musicians, we see that this corpus callosum is really thick. It's hyper developed. And it's because if you think about all the things that a musician has to do, we have to connect, of course, the motor cortices of the right and left hemispheres of the brain, but we also have to connect the visual cortex and the auditory cortex and the cerebellum that's in the front of the brain and the prefrontal cortex that's in the front of the brain. And so actually music is a whole brain activity. There is no music center for the brain because the entire brain lights up. We also can think about the brain like an onion, right? It's in layers, right? And the deeper we go in the brain, the sort of older and more prehistoric that part of the brain is. So we see activation in the sort of surface topmost layer of the onion. That's our most developed cortex, our prefrontal cortex. But if we go lower into the brain, we hit these older spots of the brain, like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the pituitary gland, even the brain stem. Even these areas of the brain light up with music. And so, in a strange way, modern neuroscience relies on music to teach neuroscientists about how the brain works. So, neuroscientists call this a neuropsychiatric modality, right? So, music actually becomes a way in which scientists can learn about the brain. So, going back to my story, I started playing the violin when I was 4 years old. Neither of my parents were trained musicians, but I took to music, learning and absorbing and devouring the Suzuki method. I was very lucky to start studying at the Juilliard School in Manhattan when I was 7 or 8 years old. And music was like that second language for me. As a child, I could immerse myself in learning things by ear and then of course learning how to read things on the page, but music became like this second mother tongue for me. But I guess maybe because I'm an Indian kid whose last name is Gupta, my parents expected me to be a doctor, and so my undergraduate was bio pre-med. And I was lucky enough to intern at a number of neuroscience laboratories. One was at City University of New York Hunter College, where I was working on some amazing research, actually studying how a central nervous system neuron could recover from paralysis. And so we were actually working in a lab funded by the late Christopher Reeve, Superman himself. And we were, researching the ways in which a central nervous system neuron could be encouraged to grow back, which was actually something really groundbreaking at the time because we thought that any damaged neuron in the central nervous system, in the spinal cord or in the brain, actually couldn't grow back, which this lab that I was working in actually proved to be not true. Then the next summer, I landed an internship at the Harvard Institutes of Medicine, where I was working on Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, studying the biochemistry of these really devastating neurological diseases. And the truth is that I actually really wanted to be playing music. My heart was not in the sort of doldrums of the science, what I saw as being intensely boring, iterative work. But the truth was that I was learning so much from the neuroscientists about how to practice the violin. And I'll come back to that in a little bit because the neuroscientists that I was working with were actually practicing failure. They were developing a hypothesis. They were testing that hypothesis, and they were, in a sense, they were kind of naming what they wanted to fail at. And then they were pursuing that failure with braver and braver and braver ideas, right? And they would design these experiments around how could they fail in the right direction. So we'll come back to that when we're talking about sort of how does this all apply to practice. But the person who was running the Alzheimer's lab at Harvard that I was working with introduced me to an amazing neuroscientist named Dr. Gottfried Schlaug, Schlaug, Gottfried Schlaug. And in fact, Gottfried Schlaug is mentioned in this book, Musicophilia, written by the amazing Oliver Sacks. And I have a whole pile of books here that I'll talk about, but this is kind of like my neuroscience and music Bible. Oliver Sacks was an amazing writer. He was a music lover. There's that really touching scene from the book and movie Awakenings, which starred Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. And they're actually sitting with these patients who are completely catatonic, who haven't moved or spoken, have been completely unresponsive to anything but music. And anyone who's seen this movie, I'm sure, will remember that touching scene where this person who is almost devoid of their humanity literally comes to life again when they hear music that they love. And so I was introduced to one of the researchers in Musicophilia, Gottfried Schlaug, and Schlaug was doing some really, really interesting research at the time. He was working with stroke victims who had become aphasic, which means that they had lost their ability to speak coherent sentences. And this was a devastating injury. Obviously, it was an injury to a part of the brain in the prefrontal cortex, the left hemisphere, called the Broca's area or the Wernicke's area. These are two parts of the prefrontal cortex that control speech. And so, what Schlaug found is that even though his patients could not enunciate and articulate words, they could sing them. And so he actually gave his patients 80 hours of singing lessons, like a dose of music. And what he found is that after a certain amount of singing lessons, where he would have his patients, say a sentence like, I went to the gym today, he would have them sing that sentence like, I went to the gym today, like that kind of thing, right? And he found that they could actually articulate, they could make sense, they could emote. And so after 80 hours of singing lessons, he did functional MRI, magnetic resonance imaging scans the whole way through. And he found that his patients had developed a homologous speech center in the undamaged hemisphere of their brain. So what does that mean? It means that the music had literally rewired the brains of his patients. Right. This is just amazing to think about. This is around 2005 that this work was happening. And he developed a protocol called melodic intonation therapy. And what's really stunning about this therapy is that it was used in the treatment of a very famous US congressperson who was tragically shot in the left hemisphere of her brain. Her name was Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. And she was, a consummate orator, and had this part of her brain knocked out. She had to go through grueling physical and music therapy, but she was also a French horn player earlier in her youth. And there was very clear evidence from the MRI scans and the work that she was doing that she was able to recover her ability to recover and develop her ability to speak again and be coherent because her brain had kind of been protected by her work as a musician earlier in her life, but was also helped by her music therapy. So, there are all of these miracles that modern neuroscience teach us about the impact of music on the brain, which I would love to talk to you more about. But I want to return to this idea of how does this apply to us now? Because the truth is, if we combine the research from these two laboratories that I was lucky enough to work in, there was this assumption early on that neurons stopped growing at a certain time. Neurons, specifically in the central nervous system, stopped growing. And then we kind of see that music encourages the growth of neurons across time. So the truth is that the benefits that music has on the brains of young people, when our brains are much more called quote unquote plastic, when they can develop connections much earlier, our brains actually retain plasticity over time. And we're seeing that the impact of music on cognitive health is just absolutely so supremely impactful, right? Music can actually be a form of medicine. It can be something that prevents cognitive decline. It can protect us from neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's disease, like Parkinson's, like the degradation of neurons that happens. It essentially is like calisthenics for the brain. So, this is what I would love to talk to you more about, to answer some more of your questions about. I have a couple of things that I call practice snacks, which are things that we can kind of apply based on modern day neuroscience to what this means in the practice studio per se. But I did want to talk a little bit about another researcher who's based at Johns Hopkins, whose name is Dr. Charles Limb. Limb. And he has done some amazing research at Johns Hopkins about music. And he's also a pianist. He's actually written about music and improvisation. But this sort of improvisation thing can be taken as things that we have learned by rote, things that are so deeply ingrained when we learn a piece of music. So I was talking about the brain as an onion earlier. And when we learn something, the brain actually works very, very hard in the uppermost layer of the onion to incorporate the new information into cortical circuits, right? So what do I mean by a cortical circuit? It's essentially building new neuronal connections in the uppermost part of the brain that almost becomes like a kind of net, right? And the reason why things feel difficult when we're learning things at first is because the brain is firing across all the different layers of the onion, trying to develop new circuitry. Right. So it's actually an incredibly complicated thing that we're trying to do when we're learning a new piece of music. Right. So it's not your fault when you miss a note or when you miss a shift. Right. Your brain is just catching up. Right. Because it has to do all of that wiring, not just in the brain, but also in the body as well, right? So when we're actually developing those new neuronal connections, if we think about the body of a neuron, right, we have a kind of net at the end and then a long body that's called an axon, and then another sort of net at the back of the neuron, right? And so the sort of net to net connection connected by this axonal body is how neurons grow, right? So when we're learning something new, we're actually orienting and reconnecting, literally restringing, rewiring all of these different parts of our brain across all those layers. But the thing that's amazing about the brain is that it's always searching for ease and efficiency, right? This is just how any kind of learning happens, right? Things feel super hard at first, we adapt, and then the new learning sinks lower into the brain, right? It becomes what we call innate, right? So we're actually using less of the topmost layer of the brain, and that activity has become embedded in the motor cortex, right? So that's actually this idea of ease, right? We're just moving something a little bit lower in the brain. It also actually explains why it's so hard to unlearn a bad habit, right? Because that bad habit is deeply ingrained in the lower part of the brain. And if we want to unlearn something, we almost have to like bring it back to the surface and correct it there, relearn, and then move it back to the lower layers of the brain, right? So we're always in this process of learning and unlearning, and that takes a lot of energy here. So, this idea of how we apply this all to the practice room, one of the things I wanted to talk about. Well, actually, sorry, I was talking about Charles Limb. Let me just finish that idea, and then you can tell I'm very excited about all of these ideas. I can't wait to hear your questions about them all and to talk to Dominic about it too. But one of the things that Charles Limb did is he developed an fMRI machine where his patients could actually sit inside the machine, have the scan happening, but then actually have their fingers on a keyboard, improvising. And Dr. Lim would be on the other side of the screen or off the glass. If anyone's had an MRI, you know how it works. And he had another keyboard on the other side of the glass. And they would do this thing in jazz called trading fours, right? And so he would play 4 bars, the person in the MRI would play 4 bars, and they would go back and forth. And what they found during improvisation or when somebody was just playing from memory or playing from heart is that their prefrontal cortex shut down. So think about that for a second, because the prefrontal cortex is what controls the planning and anticipation of what our brain is about to do. So like the next sentence is going to come, the next thing that's going to happen, what do you have to do next? It's all the prefrontal cortex. We live in a very prefrontal cortex world, right? And so what he found, strangely enough, is that when someone is improvising, they're not planning or thinking at all. And what actually lights up is something right behind the prefrontal cortex called the orbitofrontal cortex. It kind of sits like right above our eyes, but behind. It's one of those lower layers of the brain, right? So this could, how do you sort of interpret this? It could be that if your brain is just buzzing and you're anxious and you're tired and you want to just have a chance for your brain to shut down, the best thing to do is to sit down at your instrument and just play, because that's actually when your prefrontal cortex can rest and shut down. Right? Okay, so I'm going to pause here. There's so much more we can talk about. I'd love to know what questions are coming in. Dominic, if you have thoughts, but then I would love to kind of leave you all towards the end with these sort of 3 practice snacks. What can you directly apply to your day-to-day practice based on the neuroscience that is just still kind of developing and coming out? But yeah, I'll turn it over to questions now.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Vijay. I'll be getting to some of the questions, and I also got some emailed to me, so thank you, everyone. And for everyone knows, that was really remarkable information that you just shared, Vijay. This is all recorded. You guys can all watch this back time and time again. I know I will be, because there's just so many interesting things going on here. So, but I do want to get to any of your questions. And it's really interesting, this anecdote that Martha shared. Martha said, our son was failing every spelling test in elementary school, when people still did spelling tests, as she puts it. Martha says that she wrote short songs for each of his spelling words, and it worked for his tests. And now
Amazing.
He's a teacher of science and a professional musician. So that's really incredible, Martha. Thank you for sharing that. And Jenny Ford is just throwing in a comment. This is amazing. I've never heard anyone explain such complex info so succinctly and simply. So
that's
thank
very
you.
kind.
Yeah, that's. I agree, Jenny. I certainly agree. So let's see. The first question is from Carol Luskin. So Carol's asking about: is there any neuroscience research that's ever been done to try to cure tinnitus, the nerve damage type? Any thoughts on that, Vijay?
That would be a great thing to look up. I mean, there's so much amazing research out there. I'm sure that it has been done. Carol, I'm sorry that I just don't know that myself yet, but that's going to be something I look up for sure. Tinnitus is it's an interesting one, right? Because in a sense, it's both something that happens in the brain, but it's also something that happens physically, right? So we have the cochlear nerve inside the ear. And actually, the cochlea is really, really interesting because it has what's called cilia. It's like these micro hairs. We have cilia all over our body. We have cilia in our gut, in our large intestine. It's actually what absorbs nutrients. If you've ever seen the roots of a plant, they actually develop all these little tiny cilia. That's how it works. So when we're hearing a sound, the sound travels through the air and it actually activates cilia along the length of our cochlear nerve and our cochlea itself. So tinnitus often happens when one of the cilia at a certain part, and actually each cilia is tuned to every hertz frequency
Wow.
essentially, right? And so this is why we kind of start to lose hearing at the extremes of our hearing, extremes of the range, because it's essentially the cochlear nerve starting to degrade a little bit. And so that's when we hear that long tone either at the very, very topmost layer of our hearing or the most bottommost part of our hearing. But these cilia can be recovered, and one of the things that, of course, our being is not just our brain, right? And our brain is not just a machine either, right? So our brain can heal, our brain can adapt. One of the things that has been really in my own personal experience, something I notice is that I feel tinnitus. Um, when I've eaten a lot of sodium.
Oh.
Actually, when I'm bloated or inflamed, that's kind of where I start to feel something. I spent 12 years in the LA Philharmonic. I was in a professional orchestra for a very long time. Well, long for me.
Mhm.
Many colleagues who are in orchestras for much longer, but certainly I was around a lot of very loud playing for 4 concerts a week, 4 rehearsals a week. That was when I really did feel a lot of tinnitus, but I was not resting well, I was not eating well, and I
Mm.
would wake up with a ringing sound in my ears that has gone away over time. And I'm happy to talk about music and nutrition and physicality and all the things. I actually also was like 100 pounds heavier than I am now. So for me, this might be a little bit of philosophy, but I feel like the instrument through which we make music is our body and our being. It's not just the violin or the piano or the cello, right? So, in a sense, being a musician teaches us how to take care of the instrument of ourselves and our bodies. So, I will look up the tinnitus
Mm.
research, but I do want to just mention that it did change for me when I started learning how to take care of myself.
Wow. Oh, thank you for that. I mean, and thank you for explaining again so clearly what's going on, within our bodies. I don't, again, I don't think I've ever heard anyone be this simple, succinct, and more. So, and yeah, before the stream, I had mentioned to VJ, I said, VJ, I know I'm going to forget something about you. That's right. He's the youngest ever member of the LA Phil to win an audition. So also that's another thing to chalk up to his unbelievable resume. So
Thanks, Dominic.
yeah, small aside, yeah. But yeah, thank you for that question, Carol. Carol has a quick follow up comment that I was told by a Chinese ENT that there are two types. Carol's is nerve damage that was caused by an antibiotic, but I know many musicians have, I guess, the other type, which perhaps is what you're talking about, VJ.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, well, there's many things to study and more. So Carol, thanks for bringing that to our attention, and yeah, thank you for that. Sedef has a question, which you might be getting into a little bit, if so, and with your snacks, VJ. Sedef's asking, any tips about how to facilitate correcting ingrained bad habits? So if you're going to talk about that later, we can save that. But yeah,
Well, you know what? I might as well start with a little bit of that now
sure,
because
yeah, go
the,
for it.
the truth is, yeah, I mean, the first thing is this is honestly, I think the first thing to let go of is any sense of guilt or shame around ingrained things, right? It's just honestly, it's just not neuroscientifically helpful. Like shame does nothing except shut down our ability to learn, right? So that's the first thing. I mean, and it may not be a neuroscientific thing, but it's just like it's just not helpful for us to think about this. So, openness, forgive yourself, it's all good. We have the infinite capacity to learn and be better. And again, that's one of the things I love about Tonebase. Like, it's such a positive community. We can just learn and do better, right? So, one of the first things I'd say, and this is, yeah, I might as well give you practice snack number one, which is how to what I call interleaving, right? You can think about this as like A, B, A, C, A, right? So you're working on problem A. Let's say that problem A is that it's a leap of some kind. You've got a leap over 2 octaves. You just can't get it, whether it's happening on the violin, in the fingerboard, or happening on the keyboard. It's just not working, and you're getting frustrated. Okay? If you get frustrated, stop. Stop. It doesn't mean leave the instrument. It means practice something like let's call it B, right? Practice a melody, a legato, something that has nothing to do with the leap whatsoever, right? And I would say, necessarily don't you don't have to make it into practicing an etude. Let's just say that you move to the next phrase or you move on. But then after a little bit, let's say you put yourself in a timer. 10 minutes later, you come back to A and just try it. One of the things I would say about A, B, A, C, A or interleaving is be curious. What's going on, right? So what happens when you move from A to B the first time is you interrupt the aggression, right? You interrupt the frustration. Just move on. Play something really beautiful. Play something that makes you feel really good. Then come back to A, right? And you'll notice that something has changed. Get curious about that changing. But what's going to happen when you come back to A is you're going to want to stay with it, right? You're going to want to fixate on it. I would say set another timer and make yourself move on to C, something else entirely, right? So that you're also not obsessively going back to B either, right? So it's almost like what you're doing is you're looking at something indirectly. It's like the poet Emily Dickinson said, tell the truth, but tell it slant. Right? We can almost
Yeah.
not look, it's almost like looking at the sun. You can't look at it directly, right? So you have to come back at it from different angles, right? And then the last thing I would say as part of A, B, A, C, A, D, A, D is sleep. It's
Ah.
sleep,
Oh.
right? Let it
Interesting.
go.
Yeah.
Rest. Go for a walk. Because I was talking about neurons earlier, right? The way that a neuron moves faster or moves better, and this is about how the electrical impulse moves across a neuron. A neuron's like a wire, right? But across the axon of a neuron, we have insulation. And that insulation is called myelin, right? And really, really quick neuronal impulses are related to the amount of myelin around a neuron. When does myelin grow? When you sleep. That's the only time myelin grows, right? So you do not get smarter by trying harder. You get smarter by working very intensely at something. And gosh, Martha, I love that thing of the song,
Yeah.
right? That's so great.
Yeah.
Because if you just think about what the song was an intensification in a slant way of what this issue was, right? So you focused on something, then you went away from it. It's just like doing reps when you work out, too, right? You work very intensely and then you rest. So that would say that that's the ABACADA. That's practice snack number one, right? And I
Yeah.
think that could be a really cool way to just focus on A, because then when each time you come back to it, A changes and it's a little bit different. So that's number one.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of that fixation, of wanting to fix stuff all the time. And letting things go, I know, is a challenge of myself and many, people, right? So, because we want to, fix things and more. But it's so helpful. You set the timer, move through things. Things are still happening in your brain as you've left it behind. And then that retrieval process is so powerful too. So yeah, thank you for that, VJ. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, just getting back into some of the chat. There's let's see here. Let me go to another. Let me get to another question. Okay, so Martha follows up with a question. Are you familiar with the writing of Molly Gebrian? I forget
Yes.
if yeah. If so, do you agree with her approaches? Any thoughts on her work?
Yeah, I mean, I actually Molly's book is literally on my music stand right now. I have a whole pile of books that I'll be telling you about in a second. Molly's is among them. Yes, I think she's done some amazing research, and of course there's this idea of, when, her, I think her book is called Learn Faster, Perform Better. I think that what we're really talking about is also just like how to be better too. The way that we practice our instrument is also directly related to how we can engage with the world in a really powerful way too. If there's anything that I would love to talk to Molly about and understand better, it's this idea: is faster always better, right? Is learning something fast and learning something sort of like quickly, is that the thing that we should be focusing on? Because I think in certain ways I am really enjoying learning things slowly now. I'm not older by any sense. I'm 38 years old, but I feel myself learning things slower now. And actually, Dominic and I were just having a rehearsal yesterday where we were talking about exactly this, right? Where, we might be able to learn the notes to a certain extent, but actually the truth is there's so much more than the notes, right? I don't think we should stop at the notes. And in a sense, I don't even know that we should stop at execution per se, right? How can we think about the entire arc of learning a piece of music, learning an etude, whether you're about to perform it or you're never going to perform it, right? To actually embrace the fact that you're going to savor this experience of learning something deeply, right? And in fact, that might be what better is. And so I want to stress this again, that there is no such thing as learning an instrument too late. Just neurologically, it's not true, right? And in a sense, I actually feel that people who embrace learning something later in life actually do a lot better at that. It actually brings up the research of David Epstein. Range is an amazing book, and he actually compares the two tennis players, Andre Agassi and Roger Federer, right? And he actually talks about how Agassi had trained hyper, super trained early on in his life, had a really kind of turbulent relationship with being an athlete and with being a tennis player, whereas Federer started much later on in his life and was actually not really considering being a pro athlete or even a pro tennis player until he was 18 or 19 years old, which is like devastatingly late in the world of top performing athletes per se, right? So this is what we think, that, oh, if we don't have our 10,000 hours before age 15, that we're somehow less than. Right. And actually, modern neuroscience is proving this to be untrue, right? Because it's just like the question about something being too ingrained. Sometimes when we reach elite numbers of hours of practice too early in our lives, those things are too ingrained to learn later on. And I'll speak from my own personal experience. I ended up leaving the LA Philharmonic after 12 years, and it was, a lot of things that I write about in my book Restrung. It was related to wanting to find deeper purpose. I started making music in shelters, clinics, hospitals, county jails, wanting to offer music as a form of medicine. But it was this idea that if I wanted to learn something new, I would always feel myself kind of clenching up or feeling shame, like, oh, it's too late, it's too late, it's too late, because I had had this quote unquote prodigy training when I was much younger. And that started to really get in my way, because I then did proceed to lose 100 pounds in my mid 30s. I did proceed to learn other things about my violin playing that I'm making myself learn now. So sorry, this is a very long-winded answer to say I think Molly's work is spectacular and wonderful. I think that she's doing great work. I also want to caution anything that says that it's too late to learn something, or that the value of learning something is only in its speed and efficacy. Right now, I'm learning how to slow down and enjoy the process of learning, whether I'm off stage or on.
That's beautiful, and certainly as another example of a pianist. Some of you might have heard of Arkady Volodos, one of the great titans of our current time, one of the greatest virtuosos, arguably, of the last 100 years. He started piano around 16, 17. He was a singer up until that point. And by all accounts, he didn't actually really get serious until that devastating age of 15 or 16, So, I mean, and watch any video of his on YouTube and you say, yeah, this guy's got technique for spades, and his, mean, the colors are extraordinary. One of my favorite pianists. Yeah, I mean, it's really remarkable what can happen if. Yeah, you don't let those things get in your way. That's beautiful. We do have some other questions coming up, but I wondered, do you want to have another snack? Like,
Yes,
let's eat a
actually,
little more.
thank you, Dominic. Because I didn't want to interrupt you when you were talking about both of those,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
my other snack is related to singing.
Oh,
Actually,
perfect.
right? So
Yeah.
I call this one imagine, play, imagine, sing, play. Imagine, sing, play, right? So this is the kind of thing where like you look at a piece of music, but don't be at your instrument first. Don't be at your instrument first. Look at it, maybe even like sit at the dining table with it, sit with it over coffee. Maybe you can look at it before you even go to bed, you're right? But it's a kind of thing where like you're actually not, one of the things that I notice in my students is that they're about to play a piece and they just freeze, right? Because all of that tension, or I've got to nail it, comes through the sort of fear of having made the first wrong sound, right? So what I'm inviting you all to do is make the first sound in here, right? So what would it be like to take a phrase like let's just take the melody of the third movement of Brahms' Third Symphony, the beautiful cello melody. Tee-da-da-da-da-da. Right. I don't know if you can hear me singing over
Oh
Zoom,
yeah.
but that
Sounds
that might
great.
be that might be
Beautiful.
better that you can't hear me singing over Zoom. Okay.
No.
So okay, but imagine first before you sit down to play it that you sing it in your head first. Okay. So what does that do? You get a sense of the tempo. You get a sense of the pulse. Don't if you don't happen to have perfect pitch, don't worry about it. Get a sense of the dynamic, of the mood, of the feeling of it. Right? Of course, and the notes too. But no technique has entered your being yet. Okay. Then maybe even with your eyes still closed, sing it, right? So the first act of making the music is also not on the instrument, it's through your voice, right? It doesn't matter how bad your voice is, go into the shower, go for a walk, but actually verbalize it, actually sing it. So Dee-da-da, 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 dee-da-dum, ta-la-dee. Okay, and so for me, what I notice is that, okay, I'm already kind of making some movements with my body, right? I'm already getting a sense of what the physicality of this could be. Then pick up the instrument. Then pick up the instrument, right? So your technique, whatever you're developing, let's say it's your legato, or let's say it's your sound production, let's say it's in service to your imagination and your voice, right? So one of my great teachers was the concertmaster of the New York Philharmonic, Glenn Dicterow. He always said there's a musical solution for a technical problem, right? So friends, let's start with the music, right? Let's always start with the music because our technique will always be in service of what we want to say musically, right? What we want to say humanly. And there's no end to technique, right? We can always nerd out about how to play a better legato or how to play more in tune. But in a sense, too, singing, imagining, it actually allows us to be in tune, think about what we want it to sound like and feel like, and then approach it through our instrument. So that's another little snack, I would say. And it's so
Oh,
fun. It's so fun to do.
no, I mean that's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for that, VJ. Gail also mentions that Carter Bray actually didn't start cello till high school. So there's all
Wow.
these other great New York Philharmonic cellist, of course, that artists that started later. And actually, it's really interesting what you talk about, VJ, because this is actually really nicely in parallel to last week. We had Dr. Tim Stevenson, another friend of mine, pianist, who talked about aphantasia and honoralia, basically the condition where you actually cannot imagine things in your head and you actually cannot
Oh,
hear things
wow.
in your head. And it was really interesting because what he was talking about was related to what you were saying, is that for people that they really cannot actually imagine sound or imagery, but in this case sound. Tim, who experiences this, he says that it's all about digging into physical movements to get into the space, the emotions that you can feel, and these other sort of slants, these other access points of getting into the music. So I think it's a really powerful complementary type of concept. Both of these, what Tim was talking about, and also what you're sharing right now, it's really, really important. So thank you so much for that. So yeah, I don't know if you've ever, I know you can probably imagine things in your head and the sounds that you want to have, but it's truly fascinating, all the different complexities of the human brain, and all the different ways that we work to get the job done and get to where we need to be. So
I'll say one thing is that actually this is where I find my work and my life as a writer is exactly related to my life as a violinist, right? Because my imagining actually happens on the page every morning. So I have a journaling practice that's talked about by a lot of amazing writers. It's called morning pages. I'm sure many folks are familiar with it. I write 3 pages longhand every single morning, but a lot of my imagining happens there. Right. And this was one thing that I did for myself when I left the LA Phil, is that I wanted to have an iconic sound, and not to be an icon, but to be able to say, this is what my sound is. Right. And I wanted that sound to be like shimmering and silvery, and like my favorite violinist is Nathan Milstein, for the violin nerds out there, right? So I wanted to sound like Milstein, but what was that? What was that in the technique? And then it became really clear of just like journaling and dreaming and really allowing myself to be playful about it. We play music, and I think we lost the sense of play, right? And so much of play is imagining, right? And so this idea of being able to move your body. I mean, we do this in rehearsal all the time. Dominic and I and our amazing colleague Yoshi in our trio, is that we're always playing with each other, but kind of pushing and joking and moving around. But that's critical to imagining what we're going to co-create together.
Absolutely. So important. Absolutely. And speaking of kind of sitting down and playing, Vanessa has a follow-up question to one of your previous points. Vanessa's asking, can you describe the difference in sitting down at the piano or sitting down at your instrument and just playing versus really focusing and working hard, which is what she usually does. So just playing and working hard and focusing. Those are two different things. Can you talk a little bit more about what that's like for you?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I think about is Dr. Lim's research, right? So this idea of really working on something, which is super important, right? Just remember how much cortical real estate, how much energy that takes, right? So, again, like it's like working out. You have to, if you're going to be that intense about something, you have to give your brain time to rest, right? And sometimes that kind of practicing is not always enjoyable, and maybe it shouldn't be, right? We are there to get better, right? So we do want to apply some drive to that and kind of kick our butts a little bit, but to also not make practicing only that, right? So for me personally, maybe this is a confession, I don't practice scales every day, right? I actually don't practice my arpeggios. I play, and when I pick up the violin every day, the first thing I play is a Bach sonata or partita. I'll say that again. Sorry if I dropped off for a second.
Oh yeah, we can hear you. Apologies. I'm just going to close that. Yeah, there we go.
Sure, no problem. So what I actually do is I play a complete Bach sonata or partita kind of slowly, and I kind of play it for myself. Right. And that's my warm up. That's what I do when I'm warming up. So in a sense, I kind of make the first touch with the instrument an act of enjoying that time, right? And I just also play in a way that's maybe a little bit under tempo, so I'm not trying to perform, but I am kind of in this flow. I'm trying to aim for flow and forgiveness, right? So if something goes wrong, I kind of go past it. Right. And then if I need to come back to it later on, I'll come back to it, and then I'll work on it. But I always actually want to be in this sense of flow when I'm working on something.
And to drill down very briefly on this. So obviously when you're focusing and working hard, there's sort of an evaluation, judgment. So there is some aspect of that involved. What kind of like permission structure would you be having like when you are just playing? Because I do notice that's what most people struggle to turn off, is they're always judging every single thing that they do and criticizing it, and that scale didn't, and this relates to improvising as you had mentioned earlier. How does your like mindset actually shift and what you're paying attention to when you're like, if you're just to play like right now, like a Bach piece? I'm sure you've played it a million times. You probably played it better or worse depending on the years and the day? And so,
Yep.
how do you navigate inevitably something maybe not going as well as your concert last month, or
Yep.
what kind of mindset do you have to switch on for that?
Great question, Dominic, because actually I have to find a different parameter in the music making as with that is has nothing to do with my technique. Right? And so in a sense, like recently I've been trying to do more harmonic analysis. Right? Can I actually play this piece through and try to understand, is this a five? Is this a one? Is this a 2 6 5? Like what's the harmonic language that's happening here, right? So I actually choose a musical parameter, right? And so harmony is one, sound is one, articulation is one, rhythm is one. Like I might play a fugue through slowly and take, like, let's say the fugue subject is 2/16 and 2/8. Ba-da-dim, bum beam bum 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 bum. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'll play the fugue through, but I will listen or be watching on the score for how many times does that happen, right? And in a sense, almost ignore what's coming out of my instrument, but focus on what's happening. And friends, what's amazing is that's often when I'm playing way better.
Ah, I see.
Right. Just yesterday, Dominic, you and I were talking about this. I've started playing in our piano trio off the entire score. Right. And so, yes, I know my part. I'm responsible for my part, but I also need to know what's happening harmonically in your part too. Right. And I play better when I don't allow myself to get stuck in my own head. Right. If I can understand, oh, what was Mendelssohn really trying to say in this phrase? Oh, the way that he marks it in Dominic's part, I've got to actually sound like that here too, which of course is the joy of chamber music, but it's also the joy of music, period. Right. So I would say to achieve that flow state, go to the music. Right. And one of the other things I do is I record everything. Unfortunately, we have to record ourselves. It's like looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
Right. I will also say this thing too. Jerry Seinfeld, right, talks about this in an amazing podcast with Tim Ferriss. And he says, when's the right time to motivate yourself? Right. So motivate yourself to get to the page, to get to the practice room, to get to the instrument, right? To get to the gym. That's when you need your motivation. But the moment that you're there, forgive yourself. Right? So yes, motivate yourself to work on the passage that you know is not happening yet. But as you're doing that stuff, let go of the shame. Let go of the judgment. You're doing it. You're there. Right? Having that voice that says, you didn't get it, you didn't get it, it's not helpful. And in fact, that voice is so often our ego trying to protect us from growing. Right? And so I would say it because, like, that voice doesn't need to be there anymore if you actually play perfectly. Right? So much of that stuff has to be let go outside the auspices of actually sitting down with the instrument. So happy to talk more about that another time, but
Yeah.
that's my personal belief, is that that sort of shame spiral in your brain has nothing to do with how you play or don't play. It's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's very valid. Absolutely. And I get it. That sort of like letting go of, decades sometimes of built up, things. That can be hard to do. I mean, it can feel scary, and that's something that, yeah, I mean, myself as well, someone that's been, since a young kid working this and that. Yeah, we have to always kind of check in with ourselves and be like, okay, like, this is a judgment-free zone. Let's not, freak out, this or that. And a lot of times, that's always when you play better. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true. So yeah, we're coming up on the hour. Did we? We have one or maybe two more questions, but I forget if we did the third snack, or if you want to, or did we kind of touch on that
Yeah.
already, or is that?
Yeah, sure. Well, the last one that I want to say is actually something I talk about in a recent Tonebase
Oh,
reel and course, which is this idea of embrace the mistake.
oh, yeah.
Embrace the mistake, right? And so that this thing too of, like, the way that we learn, we often think that correction happens regressively, right? So we make a mistake and it's almost like we want to go back in time and not make the mistake, right? And this is where this idea of worth comes in, this kind of interruption of learning and growing. But the truth is, we can't go back in time, right? The mistake happened. Right. So the thing is that if you're in a performance, or if you're in a mode like, if you're working on something, like you're playing it through in your lesson, how do you actually build the capacity to embrace all of what's coming out of your instrument, embrace all of who you are, which allows you to actually enjoy what you're doing, but when you're practicing, to embrace the mistake. So what does this mean? Let's say that you missed the shift, right? So the idea is to, get to the place and then actually consciously make the mistake, right? And just stay there. Get curious about it. Get curious about that feeling of discomfort. Almost like listen, lean in to how crappy the mistake was, right? And just get a sense of like, okay, did I overshoot it? Did I undershoot it? Did I actually clench the bow? Why is the bow clenching there? Oh, it's because I'm tense here. Now I have a thing to work on, right? So the thing to work on is not the fact that the mistake happened. The thing to work on is the cause of the mistake, right? So you might be missing the shift not because you miss shifts. You might be missing the shift because your elbow hasn't come forward yet, right? So what we're actually learning is learning how to learn, right? We're learning how to learn. A brief aside, I'm a watch nut. I love watches. And one of the things I love about watches is that when you become a watchmaker, you have to learn how to make your own tools, right? You can't learn how to make a watch unless you have literally made your own tools, right? So this is what I love about what we get to do as musicians. We're literally making our own tools. And the only way to develop making your own tools is to embrace the places in which you don't have tools yet.
Yeah.
And it's not that you don't have tools, you just don't have the tools yet, right? And you might actually be getting stuck in the tip of the iceberg. The mistake is the tip of the iceberg. But if you embrace the mistake, you can actually understand what's happening downstream in your body, in your mind, and then work on that. Because it's almost like a node of a connection in a web, right? So if you're actually able to go down to the lower node and correct the mistake there, everything downstream usually gets better.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you, VJ. Gail's asking a very fun question. VJ, any way we can get your book before Amazon releases it?
Thank you, Gail.
Gail does not want to wait until the summer. Like, yeah, when can everyone get? Is there somewhere people can get on like your waiting list or
yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Website?
Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah.
You can follow along with what's going on my website. I'm very active on social media. You can follow me on Instagram at Gupta Violin. I'm on a number of different channels as well. My book is called Restrung. It is available for pre-order now. Dominic can probably send along the link at some point to you all. I should mention that I'm also going to be starting a community on Circle. So, hoping to continue conversations like this. One of the things that you can do is join my Circle community by doing a pre-order of the book. We're going to have that pre-order incentive set up very soon, but certainly you can buy the book now. You can pre-order it. It will be coming out on June 9. If I could send you an advance copy, I would. There's still some edits that I have to make the book even better, but I'm very excited about it. Thanks for asking, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with the Tonebase community.
Absolutely. I know you can't see the chat, but there's just a lot of thanks and compliments, abundant knowledge, enthusiasm, all these different things people are saying. So, I think everyone's really curious to read your book as well. And, I just really want to thank you so much for your time today, VJ. It's an honor to have you as a friend and as a colleague, and to perform with you. VJ and I are very excited with our piano trio with Yoshi. We have a number of different concerts coming up that we can't wait to share with a lot of people all across the world, and that's the Darshan Piano Trio that we're so excited about. VJ, is there anything else that you want to share before we close out today?
I think we've said it all. Music is such a miracle. I did want to talk a little bit about a few of the other books.
Oh, sure.
that are on my desk here.
Go for it.
The Music, The Brain and Ecstasy by Robert Jourdain is an amazing book. This is a great one. I mentioned Oliver Sacks's Musicophilia. This is a bit of philosophy. Eric Fromm talks about the art of listening. This is an amazing book. This is also Carol Dweck's Mindset is also a really, really great book. She's out of Stanford, has some spectacular thinking and advice on mindset, changing parameters of listening. The very last book, which I'm just finishing now, is one I would highly recommend. It's called Meditations for Mortals. It's by Oliver Burkeman. He has a blog called Imperfectionism, which I just love because it's this idea of, yeah, you're not going to get it all. It's not going to be perfect, and that's just fine. That's what makes us human. It makes us enjoy, and I just have enjoyed this conversation so much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Dominic. And thank you, Tonebase. Thanks for being here.
No, it's absolutely our pleasure. I agree with a number of the different chats right now. The positivity is infectious, fantastic information, bring it back. I pre-ordered, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, get your books, yeah, absolutely. It's going to be, it's wonderful, and we're all super excited of your huge accomplishment, VJ, of writing this book. I can only imagine all the work that's been going into it. But everyone, thanks so much for joining today. Have a good rest of your day. VJ, thanks again so much. And
of course.
We'll
thanks,
see you
everyone.
guys. Yeah, thanks
Take
again.
care.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.